Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, we've got Mike Bond from up in Toronto, Nolan King out in Boston, and gorgeous George Garcia joining me right here in Las Vegas. So let's just jump into it, gentlemen. This past weekend, 45-year-old Fedor Emelianenko was in vintage form, scoring an incredible walk-off KO of Tim Johnson in Russia. That was a pretty special moment for the former Pride champion. Fedor said he kind of wants to fight out his current deal with Bellator before he finally decides to call it a career. So with that in mind, what fight should he take next? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, you get it started.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see Fedor go out in this moment, obviously, return to Russia, a quick knockout, took no damage. It seemed like the perfect end, but I understand why he wants to keep going. From what I've heard, Bellator pays him a pretty penny, and he wants to collect that money. I mean, there's not going to be too many of these fighting-related paychecks left for Fedor at this stage of his life. So if he had taken like a tough loss here or a lot of damage and a win, I think the conversation right now would be different, but he basically didn't get touched in there. So I'm okay with him doing one more. And I think if you want to do like the ultimate grand send-off, why not try to end on the highest of highs? I mean, go for that Bellator heavyweight title. It's an interesting scenario right now. Of course, we know Ryan Bader beat him in the finals of the Bellator heavyweight Grand Prix. It was an extremely quick fight. I think like 34 seconds, got dropped with the jab. And now, obviously, Bader has dabbled at 205, and he's going to come back to heavyweight. Of course, we have Fedor's pupil, Valentin Moldavsky, as the interim champion there. I think he would be okay stepping aside and letting Fedor ultimately take that fight with Bader. And then if Fedor wins, he can retire, leave the belt behind. Moldavsky can become the fully undisputed champion there, and then you kind of have a perfect little saga. But, I mean, if you're Fedor, I think you look at that and see a vulnerable opponent there. Ryan Bader's been knocked out pretty badly twice since they last fought. He's older. He's slightly more deteriorated version of himself. I think that is a potentially winnable fight for Fedor. So if you want to try to go for the ultimate, I think that right there is the move. If not, I mean, you could go grab, someone off the street, Mariusz Pudzianowski or someone ridiculous like that. But I think if you want to try to go the highest of highs, that's the fight to do.
Interesting. I'm like you. I think it would have been the perfect ending to have the knockout in Russia. But, man, walking away with a title, what an ending that would be. Nolan, do you think a title shot or do you see something different?
I mean, I think what Mike said is probably the most realistic scenario just because of how Fedor picked the fight against Tim Johnson. I mean, he went in there, he wanted to fight the number one contender for a reason, which was to put himself in the best position to fight for a title. And I know Fedor, one of his main motivations has been to get back wins against guys that he's lost to. I know that was part of his thought process coming into the last couple of bouts here. But I'm going to pick one off the board that I think he should fight. And I think it would be a legacy fight, and it would be a very cool moment. I think as for us MMA fans, just the sport as a whole, to actually have two GOATs get in the cage and fight each other. I like the Anderson Silva matchup. I know it doesn't really necessarily make any sense, but I think we're at a point in both guys' careers where not many matchups are going to make sense. So I think the image of Fedor standing, at weigh-ins with Anderson, just that face-off would be something else. Them getting in the cage would be amazing. I think that's something that I think pretty much any MMA fan would have to sign up and watch that. I think it would be an expensive venture for Bellator, but at the same time, probably a worthwhile one. Probably the biggest fight in Bellator history could be produced out of that. So I know Bellator has set plans. They kind of already have a date, from my understanding, for Fedor's final fight. As long as Anderson can line up with that, and they can pay him enough, sign me up.
That's wild, man. That's out of left field. But as you're talking about, I got a big smile on my face because I was imagining what that would look like. It'd be pretty wild. I'd be signed up for it. So, George, what do you think? Is there another name that you think makes sense?
Man, that tough task here to follow these guys. Those are all excellent pitches. The only problem I guess I would have with Mike's suggestion is that the Bellator heavyweight division has been in such disarray the last 5 years, with Minikoff's reign and Bader with champ status and not really getting it going. You always have to have a strong heavyweight division. So, but that's not Fedor's problem, because to walk off with a belt and go off into the sunset would be epic. But all right, I'm gonna stick with the Brazilian theme. How about Junior dos Santos? He's a free agent. They would throw some hands, and Bellator always teases, yeah, we'd like to go down to Brazil. Go down to Brazil and face yet another UFC heavyweight champion. By the way, he's 6-0 against heavyweight champions. Maybe Junior could take some pride in avenging that.
Wow. I like that matchup too, man. You guys all make some great cases here. It's pretty wild because I'm going to be honest with you. I was worried Fedor was going to lose coming into this fight. I thought we were going to have one of those terrible, terrible endings to an MMA career. Now we're talking about some pretty intriguing matchups for something special. So we'll see what Fedor does next. Guys, it was an intriguing weekend in the UFC as well, with Paulo Costa admitting a bicep injury was the culprit behind his inability to make the middleweight limit against Marvin Vettori, leading to the fight ultimately taking place at light heavyweight instead. Now, afterwards, UFC President Dana White said he believes Costa will need to be competing at 205 pounds moving forward, while the Brazilian suggested that maybe it was going to take a little bit more money for him to make a move like that, and that 185 really is his natural division. So what do you think, guys? What makes sense for Costa moving forward? Are there matchups that make sense at 185, 205? Is there a career play? What's the move here? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, you get us started.
Dana White's 110% right. I think 205 pounds is the move here for Paulo Costa. I mean, that's pretty much what he did this week. And to be quite honest, he looked pretty good. His cardio held up. He went 5 rounds against another big, tough guy in Marvin Vettori. And I think that if he can't make the weight, that's the way to go. And I think from the UFC's perspective, they can't afford to have this guy sign up for another 185-pound fight and have him do this again. I mean, how stupid would they look if they did that? So I think at least a detour at 205 pounds. I think it will let the division at 185 figure itself out. It's always an issue when you have a guy that got beaten so badly in a championship fight, and then, you know, him trying to contend for that title again, having the same champion. I mean, is anybody clamoring to see Izzy fight Paulo Costa again? Paulo's going to have to get more wins at 185 anyway. So why not go up to 205? You have a little bit more buzz. You have fresh matchups. You can kind of sell yourself a little bit more as like, you know, now I'm at a more healthy weight class. I'm who's got this sort of athleticism that I have. So I think 155% he should move up to 205 pounds. It would be a good move for the UFC. It would be a good move for him. It would be a good move for his title aspirations. So that would be my choice for Paulo Costa.
I completely agree with everything you're saying, especially in the terms that, yes, Costa looked healthy. I mean, the fact that the 5th round of that fight was, you know, one of his best rounds, that's amazing. And as you said, I think he'd be faster for a title shot at 205 than he would at 185 anyway. So I think everything out there makes sense for him to do 205. George, I guess the thing I want to ask you here is how this situation is handled a bigger concern? I mean, are we setting precedent here? I mean, this guy came in and changed the division on fight week. We saw it happen with the Diaz brothers lately. I mean, what are we doing here? Is this bigger than just this situation in itself?
Kinda, yeah. And he didn't seem to give too many F's about it. Kind of like, this is the way I roll. You know, he was saying, maybe even threatening to not fight. Who knows what's true behind the scenes? But, you know, going back to the Izzy fight, didn't look good. You know, so getting back to Izzy part 2, it was going to take some work. Beating Vettori would have been a nice start. At least he competed against Vettori and made a fight out of it. But yeah, fight week was a disaster for Paulo Costa. So I would say, look to a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, who had his troubles, then went to middleweight, which was his next division up, and actually has done pretty well for himself. You know, he's fought at high levels versus the top guys, and treat it like you're playing with house money, knowing you can always come back to 185. Now, if you get served up, well, we've seen other guys do that. Weidman and Rockhold, I guess, where it didn't go well, so they're back. You know, and they're back to competing in the division where they held belts but they tried it. So I think that's what he should do, is give it an attempt. And it would be a good look for him right now, because he's got to be he's kind of halfway in the doghouse, but he would have been full in the doghouse if he had put in an atrocious performance on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think the fact that he had a great fight kind of saved him a little bit. I thought Dana White was going to go on him a little bit harder. Mike, I guess I'll ask you on the flip side. Marvin Vettori, I mean, he came out of this looking really good, but what do you think? I mean, did he handle this thing the right way? He put a lot on the line here, man, and was 20% of Costa's purse enough? I mean, he said he took home a nice paycheck, but should he have gotten more? I don't know. What do you think about this from Vettori's side?
Yeah, well, 20% wasn't enough, but if you believe Marvin Vettori, what he told you guys at the press conference, Paulo Costa was saying that if he took any more of his purse, 30%, 40%, he wasn't going to fight, period. So Marvin Vettori was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Like, Paulo Costa seemingly had all the leverage in this situation. He had everyone over a barrel if they wanted this fight card to go off with this main event. So credit to Marvin Vettori, man. He took it all in stride. He was a class act all the way through. He delivered a great performance in there. So like, I think this guy rose his stock so much in the eyes of the fans, the media, the UFC, his fellow fighters. Like, this was an A+ week for Marvin Vettori all the way around. There's nothing to sit here and say negatively about him. People have had their opinions about other things he said or done in his career, but here, this was like, you know, I hate to be like the pro wrestling guy, like the baby face turn or whatever, but he's a guy who didn't have much fan support, and now I think he has a big swell of it. So good for him.
Yeah, what a crazy week it was, man. That was a very unique experience, and you're absolutely right. Marvin Vettori, I've never seen more support for him than he has right now. So hopefully this doesn't become a situation moving forward. Hopefully it's an isolated incident because it was just kind of an unprofessional look for everybody involved. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. Guys, after UFC Fight Night 196, UFC President Dana White confirmed that Nate Diaz has one fight remaining with the promotion and that the company is currently working on booking that contest. So here's what I'll ask you. First, what is the best fight to make for Diaz right now? And do you believe this is actually the last time he fights for the UFC? Is there actually more opportunity for him outside of the UFC at this point in his career? A lot to talk about there, but George, just put 4 minutes on the clock. Get us started.
There are opportunities for him outside the UFC, but I don't think there's as many as he thinks. It all depends on how long he wants to keep competing in combat sports. So, you know, if he were to leave, I suppose he could always come back. It depends on how the exit goes. You know, right now all he's doing is just playing out his contract, choosing not to renegotiate. But come on, I mean, the Diaz brothers are beloved because they're MMA fighters, tough hombres that competed at the highest level, you know, in the most popular organization. That's where they need to be. That's why Nick Diaz came 6 years later. As far as a matchup, we all know which one's the most lucrative. But right now, one that's spicing up, and I tend to like it, is Tony Ferguson versus Nate Diaz. You know, NorCal versus SoCal. Well, no, we already know how that one went. So maybe we don't need to see which one's better out of the two Californias.
Wow, bringing the props and talking the trash. I like it. Well done there, George. All right, Mike, I'll ask you, what do you think? I mean, is there a fight that you think makes most sense for Nate Diaz right now? And then I'll ask you that second part as well. As George mentioned, there's opportunities outside the UFC, but how many are there? Is it more lucrative long-term to go chase that path, or is it better to stay where he's at? What do you think the future holds for Nate Diaz?
It's really tricky. So the thing with Nate is, obviously, I think for him, he wants to go get that huge payday to box Jake Paul. I think that's pretty clear. It has been for a while. Jake Paul called out. So not to say if he fights this contract out and then goes and fights Jake Paul in boxing fight, he couldn't come back to the UFC again down the road. But how do they do it? How do they usher him out of the UFC if this is it? I think if you're on Nate's side, this is why he's calling out Vicente Luque. This is why he called out Leon Edwards and Tony Ferguson. He wants to build up the most credibility possible in the eyes of the fans so that when he does leave the UFC and goes and boxes Jake Paul, they're like, hey, he fought the toughest guys on his way out. There's nothing negative you can really say on it. So I think we're going to end up with a fight in the Vicente Luque vein. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Khamzat Chimaev this weekend. I think that's a very real possibility if he wins. But the Conor McGregor trilogy, I know that's going to be talked about. I don't see why they would give Nate Diaz that fight right now and allow him to possibly beat Conor and then leave the UFC on that. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But what I can say pretty confidently is Nate is going to get a hard fight on this last one of his contract. And then I do expect him to box Jake Paul sometime in the next year.
Oh, man. I mean, look, I'm not trying to stop the guy from getting paid, right? He's been around forever. He's much beloved in the fan. But to think about the fights that we would have to lose and not see so that we could see him box Jake Paul, come on, man. Don't give me that. Nolan, what do you think? What's the move here? What's the play?
Well, you know, it's I know they said they're working on something, so I'm guessing that I'm not going to be correct with my suggestion here. It's not going to play out that way, but I'm going to propose a matchup I don't think many people have ever thought of or discussed before, which is Conor McGregor, the trilogy. How many times did we say, oh, the McGregor fight will always be in the back pocket. Diaz-McGregor 3 will always be in the back pocket. Well, guess what? We're about to run out of time. We're about to potentially lose that fight and not be able to see it. So I know Nate probably wants to fight again by the end of the year. That's what it sounds like. They already are working on something. So probably not going to be Conor McGregor. But if I was the UFC, if I was Diaz, if the thought is that this will be the last fight that he has in the UFC, I hope it isn't. But if he does, this is the time to book it. Otherwise, we're just going to lose that one and never get it. As for what Nate Diaz's future holds, will it be outside the UFC? Will it be doing boxing, something with Jake Paul? I mean, probably a lot of money out there for him to do some sort of, I don't want to call it celebrity boxing match, but a boxing match that doesn't make any sense against somebody else with a big name. So I think the UFC is going to be in some sort of bidding war for Nate Diaz, but there's only one Nate Diaz in it. They should shell up, pay him a little bit, have them stick around because I think the UFC can always use them. And as John said, we're going to lose some of those matchups that we've always thought we're going to see in the future.
I like your sarcasm there, Nolan King. And I'll be honest, I'm one of those guys that did say, hey, we can have this fight whenever. Because you could. I think those guys could be on 5-fight losing streaks each, and you put them together and it headlines a pay-per-view and does a million buys. But you're right. If he's not under contract with the UFC, then we can't see it get done unless they both do it outside the UFC. Oh, we'll see. Hopefully it comes together. That's a lot of money there. Whew. Championship week in the PFL with the organization set to crown 6 new champs and hand out 6 more $1 million checks. Now, it's a big night, and there should be some great fights, but it's hard not to focus on what happens after the card is over when we know that undefeated star Kayla Harrison is set to become a free agent. Now, here's the question. Should she stay or should she go? What's the best next move for Kayla? And will it be impacted by how things turn out in that fight with Taylor Gordado? I know she's a big favorite, but crazy things happen in MMA. So let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike.
If she loses to Taylor Gordado, we're reevaluating this entire conversation. This changes the whole thing. But let's assume she lives up to her status as the huge favorite and goes in there and does what Kayla Harrison does. She's going to have the world as her oyster at that point. And I think it's ultimately going to come down to who wants to pay her. I mean, I don't know what the future of PFL is beyond this year. I know they need to find a new television deal, all these different things. Is the same kind of money going to be there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a pretty sweet deal, man. I mean, she can continue to build up a lot of money there, build up her record, get experience. They have Julia Budd in the next tournament, which I think would be a good step for her in terms of having a name and some competition on her record, all that kind of stuff. So, like, if Kayla Harrison stays in the PFL for another year, I don't think that necessarily changes this a lot. We can just have this conversation again next year, and she'll have more experience. Amanda Nunes will be a year older and maybe a year less interested in MMA. So for her, I think it's just going to be show me the money. She's going to listen to the UFC. She obviously has a very powerful agent in Ali Abdelaziz. He's going to listen to Bellator talking about a Chris Cyborg fight. He's going to talk to the UFC about bringing her in there, and then PFL is going to do what they can to keep her. And I think they should do everything they can to keep her. So I don't know where this is going to go. It's just who wants to cough up the biggest bag, but it's a good time to be Kayla Harrison right now for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. First of all, Taylor Gordado can absolutely play spoiler here, right? So it's a difficult assignment, but if she wins, I think that changes the dynamic here a lot. But Nolan, what do you think? I mean, it's an interesting position for Kayla, right? Because she says, I just want whoever's going to write me the biggest check. But she's also said, I want to be known as the greatest of all time. And you would think that would mean beating some of those other women that are in the conversation. So what do you think the play is here for Kayla Harrison?
It's really complicated, right? And I saw actually right before we jumped on here that UFC President Dana White did an interview with TSN, and he kind of sounded not interested, like, oh, you know, Kayla's going to make sure she's ready. She should, if I were her, I'd stay away from Amanda Nunes and, you know, keep fighting the people that she's fighting. So I'm not really sure what that tone change from Dana really represents. If anything, maybe it's just something you can use down the line and say, well, you know, I questioned Kayla Harrison, but I'm not going to question her anymore, kind of propel her up. But for me, I think the UFC is the way to go. You know, Bellator, I guess she could go there. It's a little bit more of a legitimate women's featherweight division than even PFL has. If she wanted to kind of take a step up and get some of those bigger names like Chris Cyborg, you know, or some other women that have been around, kind of more veteran types at 145 pounds. But I think the UFC is the way to go. I don't think that I think Kayla Harrison's somebody that they can promote. I think she's somebody that has the it factor. Who's going to complain about seeing her and Amanda? You know, they'll probably get a warm-up fight out of her, have her fight Amanda. I think both those fights would be big. And so if I'm her, I'm doing what's best for me. I'm doing, you know, whatever gets me the most amount of money. But if she's in it for the legacy, I mean, you got to go to the UFC. As we've said a million times before here, you know, kids grow up. They don't grow up to be MMA fighters or be in Bellator or PFL. They grow up to be in the UFC. So if she wants to do what's best for her legacy, it's pretty clear option for me.
It sounds to me like Dana White speak for we made an offer and found out it wasn't as much as PFL, so we're going to act like we're not real interested right now. George, what do you think? Is it just chase the check or is it chase some legacy?
Just like you guys said, if Gordado wins, stay with the PFL, build up the third, you know, the next fight, the rematch. I think Bellator has more bodies at 145 pounds, so that I think gives her, I guess, more of a playground and an adequate champion in Chris Cyborg there for her to get over as well. But yeah, the UFC is just tailor-made for Kayla Harrison. I mean, she's just become a monster on the mic. She can play the heel role if she wants. She's always carving up Sean O'Connell, or she can be, you know, a sweetheart. I could see her being huge for the UFC just on the mic alone, her having a huge future with the UFC. So I think the UFC definitely would be the best place for her to wind up long term.
I'd like to see it. I mean, obviously she stays with PFL and continues winning there. That's great for her, but I would love to see some of those matchups that we talked about happen at some point in time. And hey, maybe some AEW wrestling down the line as well, right? American Top Team seems to be having a little fun over there. Well, guys, UFC 267 is this Saturday in Abu Dhabi. Special early start time for everyone on that one. It is loaded with some very meaningful fights. We've got Jan Blachowicz versus Glover Teixeira. We've got Corey Sandhagen and Peter Yan. Dan Hooker, Islam Makhachev, Hamza Chimaev, Li Jingliang. Also just a couple of names that are really generating buzz ahead of time. But I'm going to ask you what we're going to be focused on after the card is over. Who's going to steal the spotlight at Etihad Arena? 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, kick it off.
Yeah, I think this card's really under the radar, and it's a pay-per-view event. I know we get it for free, and it's got a lot of evs and ovs at the end of their names, so sometimes it doesn't necessarily warm up to the American audiences, but I think this is a phenomenal card from a talent standpoint, and it does have a lot of promotable stars. But I kind of feel like you got the 2 title fights at the top there, but this is kind of Islam Makhachev's big coming out party, I think. Him versus Dan Hooker is going to be a great fight. Everybody knows what Dan Hooker brings to the cage, the excitement, the bangers, the willingness to step up in an opportunity like this on short notice against a guy nobody wants to fight. But it just still seems like Islam Makhachev is going to be the guy that ends up walking away victorious to me. That's my prediction. And if he does so, that's a very legitimate win. I think he positions himself in a spot where top contenders can't deny him anymore. It's the risk reward thing. And I think a lot of fighters have seen him as a high risk, low reward matchup. But now if he climbs up those rankings and he's sitting at the top, the reward starts to be there as well. So I think it's a big opportunity for him. It's obviously in the Middle East. So there's some, fan crossover there against the top contender with a card that's on free, in the United States. I think it's Islam Makhachev's spotlight to lose.
Yeah, big opportunity for him for sure. You win here against a reputable name like Dan Hooker, and you do it on this stage. And it's not going to have impact just here in the United States. It's going to have impact, as you said, kind of globally for the fan base. So a big opportunity for him. George, who else is going to shine? Who's going to steal the spotlight?
I usually go for the lighter weight classes. I'm a big fan of the lighter weight classes, but in this instance, I'm just going to go with the low-hanging fruit, and I'm going to explain. Jan Blachowicz and Glover Teixeira are a perfect story of never giving up on your career, the ups and the downs, the losses, the difficult losses that they've taken, but yet they've dusted themselves off, and here they are ready to perform on the biggest stage, in Abu Dhabi, in the main event, title fight, for title defense for Jan Blachowicz, who has done very nicely stepping in for, the horrible exit, I guess, that John Jones had, where he just kind of left. I mean, it would have been always nicer to beat the incumbent, but it didn't go down that way. But Jan Blachowicz he's done well, man. He really has for himself. And they're 2 great combat sports countries. So Poland's either going to have another title defense, and they're going to have the star is going to shine brighter for Blachowicz, or Glover Teixeira is going to, take another belt back to Brazil. It's outstanding. Both guys are great on the ground. They have heavy hands. Both guys can take a shot, and they have, so much resolve, such great chins. I just think it's going to be an awesome fight that we're going to be gushing about on Monday.
I love it, man. 2 well-respected, well-liked veterans of the sport, 2 just great guys, and you're right. It's going to be a good story one way or the other, and I think it's going to be a really good fight. Mike, what about you? Somebody else there you think might steal the shine?
There's a lot of good names on this card. I'm interested in seeing a lot of them. Of course, that interim bantamweight title fight, I think, has fight of the night written all over it. I mean, Corey Sandhagen, Peter Yan, this fight in a vacuum with all the, nonsense of the interim title and the first guys coming off losses to fight for a belt against each other. Like, throw that all aside. This is a absolute banger on paper, and I think someone's going to get highlighted pretty bad in this fight. We'll see how Corey Sandhagen can rebound. Peter Yan is an absolute machine. I think he was doing great against Aljamain Sterling before the whole nonsense of throwing that accidental knee. So I think this is a big rebound performance here. He's going to have to show what time it is a little bit in this division. I mean, bantamweight is so good. So that's going to be an awesome fight. But who's going to steal the shine inside the octagon, John? Some breaking news here for us. It is going to be one Joe Martinez, who is going to be stepping in for Bruce Buffer. The first time Bruce Buffer hasn't called a numbered event, I believe, in the Zuffa era, as the cage announcer. So there you go, boys.
Clearly, all the headlines after UFC 267 are going to be about Joe Martinez. You just know about it. Hey, listen, it's funny, man. That bantamweight fight is going to be fantastic. I know the situation in the division is a little frustrating right now, but that fight is going to be phenomenal. And, man, Hamzat Chimaev, Li Jingliang, man, what a fight that's going to be. So, Nolan, I think as you said it, maybe a fight card that's kind of flying a little bit under the radar overall that I think is going to deliver a lot of storylines this weekend. So looking forward to it. Guys, it's going to be a busy week. Obviously, Dana White Contender Series is starting to wrap up. One championship is action, the PFL Championship. You got the first of back-to-back numbered events for the UFC. A lot going on. We'll talk about it all here on Space.